reside in my riding. 12 Rings Shearwater contributes in excess of $1 billion annually to our immediate local economy. With the new exciting helicopter program that is currently being implemented, that number will increase by $200 to $300 million annually. The Military Family Resource Centre is also located at 12 Rings Shearwater and is an intricate support to the military families that reside in my constituency. Not only does our military contribute to the economy, but they also give back by volunteering within the communities they reside. I ask the members of this House to join me in recognizing 12 Rings Shearwater and military families and all that they contribute to communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time has expired for member statements. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, family doctors in this province get calls every single day from people looking to find a doctor for them. This is something that the Health Authority now calls a conundrum. Well, no wonder, Mr. Speaker, because it's the policies of this very government that are making it difficult for medical practices to recruit new doctors. When a medical practice wants a new doctor, they first have to get approval to even advertise for the position. That takes months. When a new doctor is hired, they have to get approval to fill the position. That also takes months, Mr. Speaker. In the meantime, families would go without a doctor. I would like to ask the Premier, when so many families in this province need a doctor, why is his government making it harder for new doctors to set up shop?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I want to thank those healthcare workers across the province who are doing tremendous work. Mr. Speaker, we see new healthcare delivery model and the collaborative practices that are taking place across Nova Scotia. Former Dean of Dow Medical School, Dr. Tom Mary, brought to this province a rural residency program, which has residents who are working in underserviced areas across our province and rural communities. It's been a great success. We're continuing to see more and more of them staying in those communities. We know there's more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We're working with our partners to make that happen. Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to always improve the process, and if there's more work to be done to improving the process, we'd be more than happy to do so.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and yet thousands of Nova Scotia families go without a doctor when there are doctors out there to be hired, but the policies of this government, they take months and they get in the way. And I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker. There is a doctor in Beaverbank. He has 1,600 patients. He's already, Mr. Speaker, applied to hire a second doctor for his practice, and he's been turned down by this government to hire a second doctor to look after the families in that area, Mr. Speaker, that are without a family doctor. They've been told no by this government, Mr. Speaker. This is the same Premier who in his election platform promised a doctor to every Nova Scotian. I'll table that, Mr. Speaker, and then ask the Premier, why is his government turning down willing doctors after promising that everyone would have one?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I think he's working with outdated information, Mr. Speaker. I encourage him to be more I encourage him, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I encourage the members of the Conservative Party to be more optimistic about the future. Nova Scotians are.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, nothing is more pessimistic than the Premier himself calling his platform an outdated document. It's outdated on power rates. It's outdated on jobs. It's outdated now on family doctors, Mr. Speaker. That is the problem. And here we have thousands of Nova Scotia families wanting to have a family doctor like the Premier promised him when he was looking for their votes in his platform, Mr. Speaker. And when it takes months and months to approve even willing doctors, well, they give up, Mr. Speaker, and they go somewhere else. So I'd like to ask the Premier, why is his government making it harder for doctors to come and serve the family needs of Nova Scotians after promising to make it easier?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, he is right, it's outdated. Mr. Speaker, power rates are reduced in this province. He's the only Nova Scotian who goes to bed at night hoping power rates goes up, Mr. Speaker. We've invested in public education, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to live it. Youth, Mr. Speaker, retention is up in Nova Scotia. Population is growing in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. You're right, Mr. Speaker. We're not looking back to 2013. We're looking ahead to 2017.
House for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With each day that goes by, there are more and more questions about this government's health care strategy. When amalgamating the health authorities, the focus was on administrative savings. We haven't seen those yet. Now, Mr. Speaker, there is a growing concern that when it comes to health care in Nova Scotia, the creation of a single health authority has drowned out the voices of communities across the province. So I ask the Premier, what is his response to the concern that communities are being left out of the development of the health care strategy in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I want to thank all those Nova Scotians and communities across this province that continue to work with healthcare providers to ensure that the healthcare team that their community requires is in place. We're continuing to work with the Health Authority and the Department of Health are working together on infrastructure across our province. Do we have more work to do? Of course we do, Mr. Speaker. But I think Nova Scotia's made it very clear in 2013 that they wanted the walls to be torn down between their healthcare system. They wanted to make sure that the precious healthcare dollars that we had were being focused on frontline healthcare delivery. Mr. Speaker, they've also identified, Mr. Speaker, that they want that delivery model to change to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we're delivering good quality healthcare in a timely manner across our province in a single system.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier continues to give passive responses to health care concerns, and communities are getting tired of it. In Digby, concerned citizens held a meeting in March to discuss setting up their own health coalition. One local resident who attended the meeting said, most importantly, the coalition would be an opportunity for the people of Digby to be heard and to take part in an open democratic process to make things better, and I'll table that. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask the Premier if this government is engaging with communities about health care strategy. If they are doing this, why is Digby considering starting their own health care coalition?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I think what she was, the good people of Digby, I must say, have done a tremendous amount of work, Mr. Speaker, of ensuring that they have the collaborative practice, Mr. Speaker. We know there's been continued challenges there, Mr. Speaker, in terms of recruiting and retention. There's been great work. The member has been a great advocate. The member's been a great advocate, and I just want to inform the member. I want to inform the leader of in the House of the Democratic Party that the good member was at that meeting, and what the people were referring to was the former government, not the current government that's been working with them.
The Honourable Leader in the House for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, communities have many issues with this government's health strategy, but of the utmost concern is the absence of a plan to address ER closures. Amalgamating the health authorities has not improved this situation. And as my colleague from Queen Shelburne has pointed out many times, ER closures are rampant across the province. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, we see a reduction in funding for emergency departments. So I ask the Premier, what is his plan to address ER closures that have been dramatically decreasing under this government?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's one thing we're not going to do is follow the lead of the former government when they closed emergency rooms across the province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue, Mr. Speaker, to work with our healthcare providers. We're going to continue to work with our healthcare providers across the province, Mr. Speaker, to deliver services to Nova Scotians. I want to thank the tremendous work that has been doing in communities where communities...
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid will come to order. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, everyone's a bit sensitive today. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, healthcare providers across this province are working with government to continue to deliver services to Nova Scotians. We've said we continue to have work to do, Mr. Speaker. We continue to have work to do across the province. We're going to continue to work with the healthcare providers, and we'll do this, Mr. Speaker, in a systematic way to ensure that the healthcare will be there for future generations in a sustainable, affordable way.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. The South Cumberland Community Centre in Parsboro is Nova Scotia's first collaborative emergency care centre, Mr. Speaker. The people of Parsboro area were promised that this would be the solution to closed ER hours when it was opened a few years ago. Well, Mr. Speaker, according to the most recent accountability report on emergency rooms, South Cumberland closed a total of 108 hours last year, and I know the minister has the report, but I'll table it again anyway. It's closed due to a lack of doctors in the area. Mr. Speaker, what is the Minister of Health doing to get a doctor to Parsborough to keep that CEC open?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. It was one that he brought up in estimates. I relayed it to the CEO, Janet Knox, also to Dr. Lynn Harrigan, who is overseeing recruitment. And yes, that work is in progress, because I know there is a doctor that is currently on leave there, and there is about $2.6 million in the budget for locums to replace such doctors.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe we should get Janet Knox in here to answer these questions, because I hate to remind the Minister of Health, no matter who he refers to, he is accountable for these things, Mr. Speaker. That's why it's called an accountability report. And the fact of the matter is that he's been asking for a locum doctor and been turned down repeatedly. Mr. Speaker, the government would rather save the money and leave the people of Parsborough without a family doctor, even though he's quite correct. It is a maternity leave, something was known well in advance, Mr. Speaker, so he can fix that right now. Will the minister commit to provide a locum doctor for Parsborough until a long-term solution is found?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is an important position to fill for the short term, and the Health Authority is working to recruit and get a doctor there as quickly as possible.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of Health. In April of 2015, the Nova Scotia Health Authority released its medical staff bylaws. I'm hearing from many physicians who have concerns about the effect of these bylaws, Mr. Speaker. This government does not have a strong track record when it comes to consultation. On this issue, I've heard from so many physicians with complaints that I'm starting to wonder, Mr. Speaker, at what level was their consultation with family physicians here in Nova Scotia. So I'd like to ask the Minister, who did the Health Authority consult before implementing its medical staff bylaws?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As in all major decisions, like replacing the VG, like changing the model of care here in the province, doctors Nova Scotia and individual doctors have been consulted during the process. It is a considerable change. There really are no major comprehensive team practices here in what was the old central zone. Much work remains to be done, and doctors will be part of the process of changing that model.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
We're all aware, Mr. Speaker, of this government's promise to ensure a doctor for every Nova Scotian. They put it down on paper, Mr. Speaker. There is a concern that these new bylaws will actually have a negative impact on attracting doctors or even keeping the ones we have now practicing in our province. Doctors are worried that the Health Authority is trying to restrict the freedom of installation, phase out the walk-in clinics, and create a duplication in the certification process, Mr. Speaker. Roadblocks after roadblocks. So I ask the Minister, how will these new medical staff bylaws help ensure a doctor for every Nova Scotian?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the issue of walk-in clinics surfaced this spring, it was very, quickly brought to a conclusion in that these doctors were assured there would be a walk-in clinic and their services available to people in HRM, while over the next 10 years there would be a transition to more collaborative practices. So I can assure the member opposite that primary care, and it may be a doctor, it may be a nurse practitioner, maybe a family practice nurse, but primary care will be available to Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to you is for the Minister of Health. And I would like to remind the Minister of Health, he's the Minister of Health for Nova Scotia, not for Disneyland. Mr. Speaker, he keeps on referring to all these different issues that are travelling through and how people are talking about collaborative medicine, nurse practitioners, and yet he and his department will not let those things take place. We have hundreds of Nova Scotians who have not and cannot get a doctor to look at them. And this minister and this premier continue to say everything's good. Everything's all right. Well, Mr. Speaker, I would like this minister to stand up and tell the people of Cape Breton Island who can't get a family doctor that everything's okay, because it's not.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The question was the same as yesterday, only I got his wink yesterday. But I want to tell the member opposite and all Cape Bretoners that we're very pleased to have recruited 10 GPs six will be directly in the CBRM, 4 will be on the periphery, and 10 more are in the process of being recruited.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when the minister talks about these doctors that are coming to our area, he forgets to mention that it's going to take anywhere from 12 to 24 months for them to come. And there are people that need doctors today. I would like for this minister to tell the thousands and thousands of people across Nova Scotia and the hundreds of Cape Bretoners that don't have a doctor, and he can say, yes, I asked this question yesterday, and I'll ask it tomorrow, and I'll ask it every other day after that, because that minister is not doing his job and looking after the people of the province of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, when will this government live up to its promise of a doctor for every Nova Scotian?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Remind the member opposite that 3 to 4% of Nova Scotians never ever look for a doctor. So we got a group that never look. What I can tell the member opposite is that
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg will not infer that anybody on the opposite side or any member of this House is not telling the truth. I'll ask you to retract that officially.
I'll be happy to retract that officially when he does tell the truth.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker.
I'll ask you once again to retract that.
When he tells the truth, I'll retract it.
I'll have to ask the Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg to excuse himself for the balance of question period.
Out of respect for you, I will, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
My question is also the Minister of Health. The opposition is asking hundreds of questions about doctors here in Nova Scotia. Many people do not have a doctor, and many people have not had a doctor for years. Mr. Speaker, we hear a number of different answers to the questions. My question is, who is ultimately in charge of recruitment in Nova Scotia? Is it the Nova Scotia Health Authority, Doctors Nova Scotia, Dal Medicine, or the Department of Health?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just to let the members from Cape Breton, all Cape Bretoners know that between July and September, 10 new doctors will be arriving in Cape Breton, and that is good news. The member referred to the fragmented approach that has gone on for a number of years in the province, and having a very fulsome conversation last week with Dr. Lynn Harrigan. They now have a provincial team that are going to address the hot spots in the province, as well as get that inventory of doctors and when they plan to retire, what percentage and how many hours of a practice they currently are in, and that's some of the missing pieces of information for long-range planning. I can tell the member opposite that the Health Authority will in fact have a provincial plan finally for doing full recruitment.
The Honourable Member for Northside Westmount.
So, Mr. Speaker, the Health Authority is going to have the ultimate plan. will the Department of Health have the ultimate say on where these numbers and licenses go? Because in Nova Scotia right now, in Cape Breton especially, we have over 1,000 patients at an orphan clinic that have no family doctor. The family doctors that are working that clinic are working in the emergency room and their own practice, and they're getting burnt out, and they're not taking any more patients. Mr. Speaker, assuming we can catch up to the Liberal election promise of one doctor for every Nova Scotian, what's the Minister going to do to ensure that doctor recruitment happens in Cape Breton and Nova Scotia, and we can do our best to maintain those doctors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the member is well aware of the current residency program in Cape Breton, in fact has provided a number of doctors that came who weren't from the area but decided to stay and practice in Cape Breton. The residency program will continue to provide doctors for the area, but certainly doing more long-range planning for doctors who are going to retire or leave a practice. That is the goal of the Health Authority, and some very strong recruiting. 48, for example, here in Metro has taken place already this year.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, Julie Hollett has been active her entire life as a runner and a member of the Northwest Trail Association. However, Judy is in need of a hip replacement and has not been told by the Health Authority when she can expect her surgery to take place. However, Mr. Speaker, we know it could take years. Judy says the pain has been getting worse while she waits on the wait list, and her quality of life is suffering as a result. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what can the Minister say to Judy, who has not been told by the Super Board Health Authority when her surgery will be scheduled?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell the member opposite that it's not up to the board to obviously give a date for surgery. That is the work of her family doctor, the work of the orthopedic surgeon to determine when she will have surgery. And I know there are many Nova Scotians who wait too long, but I'm pleased to say that this year we have added several hundred more hip and knee surgeries that have been completed. We're also adding additional dollars. A new orthopedic surgeon, primarily foot and ankle, will start in July. We have reduced the wait list, and we'll continue to attack it in that systematic way.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
What a cop-out, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the board doesn't call the patient, but the board oversees the physician and oversees the wait list, just like this government oversees that wait list, Mr. Speaker. So to play wordsmith, Mr. Speaker, is not an answer for Judy. She's wanting to know when she can get her surgery, Mr. Speaker. The Minister told Nova Scotians that the amalgamation of the District Health Authority would mean less waiting for people like Judy. The Minister also claimed that now under one health authority, the walls have been taken down, Mr. Speaker, and health services will be improving. Well, I don't see any evidence of that, Mr. Speaker. What can the Minister explain? Can the Minister explain to Judy why she is being forced to wait years, Mr. Speaker, to have her surgery so that she could return to the active lifestyle that she led?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question opposite. And I know as a runner, if I couldn't get out on the trail, certainly it would be very bothersome, and I can understand her plight. Sometimes, too, with young Nova Scotians, they try to push hip and knee replacements, off as long as possible, knowing that they will need revisions at some point along the way. What Nova Scotians really need to take a look at, Mr. Speaker, is that under the former NDP government, they had a little blip called March Madness to do more surgeries. We have a systematic way of improving, and we've added to the budget year over year. More hips and knees have been done, 14, 15, and again in 16.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to give the I'm going to give the Minister of Health a bit of a break. My question is for the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage. He put out a release this morning regarding Statistics Canada data which showed that jobs in the province's cultural sector increased from 2010 to 2014. The release attributed these years to 4.7% and a total of 13,874 jobs. What's interesting to note is the Minister chose to quote the period of 2010 to 2014 and not the year-over-year data which Statistics Canada's release was about. The year-over-year data actually shows a decrease in the number of jobs in the cultural sector by 1.8%. And it's only an increase if you go back to 2010. So was the Minister aware before putting out his release that the Statistics Canada data which he referenced actually shows a decrease in jobs, not an increase?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I disagree with the member and I stand by this release. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll table the data that his own release links to. Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, I asked the Minister what he would use as a baseline for the number of jobs in the cultural sector which he would measure success by, and the Minister refused to commit to a baseline. But since he's put this release out today, and therefore presumably endorsed it, will he use this number of 13,874 jobs and the GDP contribution of 2.7% as the baseline as the measure of success?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And you know what? I'm really happy that you're asking this because, you know what? Culture in Nova Scotia has been very good. I accommodate and I applaud the craftsmen, the musicians, the artists, and everybody who works in this sector for all their hard work. So thank you for that, and thank you to all those who work in the sector who work hard on Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, we need doctors. Obviously, that is very evident. There are far too many residents in Pictou without a doctor who sadly had to rely on the after-hours outpatient clinic, which we all now know closed abruptly on April the 29th. Can the Minister please tell us where he now expects these residents to go to seek medical assistance?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was an unfortunate development, but we have to remember this was a private arrangement of doctors to be available for some extra hours beyond their daily clinics. They had started out, in fact, probably as younger doctors, providing 7 days a week, moved it back to 6 to 5 to 4. They were in the process themselves of taking that service out of operation. Currently, Dr. Lowe is looking at recruitment for that area and determining, in fact, if an after-hours clinic is needed, or is it another doctor or a nurse practitioner to the collaborative practice, in fact, that may be needed most.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, an after-hours clinic is absolutely needed. In fact, the other day I had asked a family member to take a resident from Pictou to the ER in New Glasgow because they didn't have any financial means for transportation. We can't continue to do that. The list keeps escalating to the point of no return for those who need a doctor. And, you know, the emergency in New Glasgow is there for people that have an emergency. What about the people that have a condition that need to be monitored on a weekly or, you know, bi-monthly basis? Will the Minister please tell us what steps specifically are being taken to address the lack of doctors in Pictou?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know Dr. Lowe is looking at the needs of that whole northern region, including Pictou, of course, and whether or not an additional primary care provider, who could be a nurse practitioner, added to the existing clinic, that in fact would allow more patients to be seen during regular hours. That is one of the areas currently being explored, as well as ongoing recruitment efforts.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know this was talked about a little earlier, but Dr. Sad is a family physician for Beaverbank, opened his practice a few years ago. The patient demand quickly outpaced the ability to provide services without hiring an additional family doctor. The health authority denied his request based on the fact that he was not in a geographic area that was in the most need. So not only is the problem in rural Nova Scotia, but we actually have the problem right here in Halifax and in surrounding areas. So my question to the minister is, when thousands of Nova Scotians are without a family doctor, why is the minister restricting those with successful practices from hiring additional physicians to meet the needs?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to be very direct in relation to the doctor just raised here, his clinic will be provided with another doctor. I've been in conversation with Dr. Lynn Harrigan, and we know that in some areas there in fact are sufficient doctors. In other areas of the metro region, there aren't sufficient doctors geographically situated. The practice in the past here has been very much a private entity, doctors setting up a clinic, very often getting their own doctors to fill a clinic. Now there's going to be a larger view of what the nature of the patient workload is requiring for primary care providers, and so it is a change, but I'm pleased to say that the doctors, one in particular who has 7 walk-in clinics, is working with the health authority to in fact change the practice.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister for that answer. The article, of course, that was in Global was actually from the 28th of April, so it seems like a lot of things happened in the meantime. Thanking the member for Sackville Cobequid for his interventions in this as well. But it took the opposition to push on the department to get these things to happen, because without they would not have looked at it. So I want to see what happens here next, because if this is going to happen in other places around the province, that the health authority is going to say, no, you can't hire a physician because we don't think you need one. I can't imagine that. So can the minister table by the end of today the new policy on hiring physicians, or how hiring physicians are going to happen in rural areas because of this change?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell the member opposite is that on a continuous basis, the health authority recruitment team are working with doctors, in particular here in the Metro and across the province. They are initiating a model practice of collaborative care, which we know has worked tremendously in parts of the province. In fact, Clare is a wonderful example, of setting up that practice and getting doctors to come back to the area. Bridgewater, which went through a decade unable to recruit and retain doctors, they now have sufficient doctors in Bridgewater. We're going to make this happen across the province, and we'll see an improvement.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I asked the Minister of Health to explain the government's intention for funding trauma-specific therapy services available to survivors of sexual violence in both Antigonish and through the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. The response seemed to be positive, but I believe the Minister may also have been confused about the two programs, the difference between the Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program and these trauma-specific therapy services. So just for clarity, I'd like to ask the Minister, can the Minister explain if, in fact, the funding specific to these therapy services will continue to be provided?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll save him part 2 of a question. Those 2 positions will be fully funded through the Health Authority for the next year.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but I can adapt. I can adapt my second question. I've been here long enough. So I'd like to ask the Minister, does the Minister have any plans to expand these therapy services beyond the 2 sites? It's much needed in our province, I believe, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I can tell the member opposite, and this is an issue that many Nova Scotians have become engaged in looking for, better services. And for the first time, we have hired in the Department of Health and Wellness a provincial coordinator that will look at SANE and all sexual assault services across Nova Scotia, because we have really relied upon ERs for much of this work, and now getting the right program in the right places across the province, that's exactly what's going to happen.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. I was talking to family friends the other day, and their son is going to become a doc. And I asked, will he stay in Nova Scotia, because he'd be an excellent doctor. And they kind of weren't sure what he was going to do. I understand the Department of Health and Wellness is moving toward a collaborative approach to health care, and I understand that new docs are really open for this. What happens to the private practices that may go because of retirement or other reason? What happens to them in the transition period?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
That is a very good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member who just asked that question, I believe he should be on the front benches. That is a great question, and there are there are a number of older doctors.
The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
There are many older doctors who actually have joined the collaborative practice. We're all aware of this. And in fact, one of the great strengths is their collegiality to mentor young doctors. This has taken place in a number of communities. There will be a period of transition. I'm more than prepared to sit down with the member and go through a number of scenarios that have taken place across Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Colchester, Musqueam Valley.
I thank you for that. A follow-up, I was just wondering about incentives. The information I got was that if someone took over someone else's practice, the government would, or the Department of Health, would give them 15 minutes to interview one of the patients. If they started up a new practice, they were given an hour to interview new patients. I'm just wondering what kind of incentives are in place to help those folks decide to stay.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And part of what is in that question, in fact, is now one of the areas under deliberation through the master agreement. One of the areas that I'm very pleased to speak to is that 5 of the 10 doctors who are actually going to Cape Breton are going there because of the tuition relief program that we've put in place.
The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, it has been reported to me by doctors in the Valley that they do not receive compensation for a senior's home visit on the weekend, while doctors in HRM do receive compensation for a weekend visit to a senior's home. Clearly, having a timely doctor's visit could save ER time or even save a life. My question for the Minister is this. Will the Minister please explain why doctors in HRM are paid for visiting a nursing home on the weekend while doctors in the Valley are not paid for the same service? And will he ensure that this discrepancy will be eliminated in the new master agreement?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I'm glad I got my 40-minute run-in before Health Minister Day here in the question period. But what I want to tell the member opposite that this, in fact, is one of those areas that was really just taking place here in the old Capital District. One of the reasons, as we all know, for the One Health Authority, yes, it'll save money, it'll get more to the front lines, but having a standard of practice across the province, that's exactly, this was a one-off situation, and this will be changed across the province.
The honourable member for Kings North.
I'd like to thank the Minister for that response, Mr. Speaker, and I question whether this is a one-off situation. I can give another example in another area, which is more recent, which would be has happened in this new health authority regime. And that is that we have Syrian refugees coming into our communities now needing medical care and having a huge barrier towards having care because they need translation services, and these services are not always readily available in rural Nova Scotia and can be quite expensive. However, there's a translation line available, but this line is only available to doctors in HRM, and I'll table that document. Will the Minister explain to me why a phone service to call and get translation service for refugee patients is not available to doctors in the Annapolis Valley, but is available to HRM doctors right now?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and very important question. As we know that, in fact, there are Syrian refugees that now have spread out across Nova Scotia. Some have very limited English at this stage. Fortunately, across the province and the area where the member they speak to, I know Port Williams, Wolfville, Kentville, they've been fortunate to be able to have a translator with them on many occasions. But I'll look into this question to make sure that that service, in fact, is available across the province.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Today, our caucus has again tried to highlight the many health care issues that are going unaddressed by this government. ER closures are up, wait times are up, more and more Nova Scotians cannot, I repeat, cannot find a family doctor, and rural Nova Scotians are feeling abandoned by the creation of a single health authority. Mr. Speaker, 2.5 years into this government, things are getting worse. So I ask the Premier, will he admit today that this government, his government strategy around health care has failed Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I completely disagree with the question and the entire preamble that he brought before it.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The people of Queens Shelburne has had enough. I repeat, has had enough of this Minister of Health's inability to provide an adequate level of health care services. We were told, I repeat, we were told there was a plan to address the ER closures at Roseway. However, I have made many continuous attempts. I talked about the closures of the ER. Certainly is very well known in this House in this session. Mr. Speaker, the people of Queens Shelburne has lost trust and faith in this minister. So I ask the Premier, will he appoint, I repeat, will he appoint a new Minister of Health to try to re-establish the trust and faith of the people of Queens Shelburne?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. It gives me an opportunity to stand up and tell this House and all Nova Scotians of the great work that the Minister of Health...
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Queens Shelburne will come to order. The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to tell all members of this House what a great job the Minister of Health has been doing, working with our partners across the province. Mr. Speaker, the first...
Order, please. The honourable member for Queens Shelburne. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. I'll ask the honourable member for Queen Shelburne to excuse himself. Please. The honourable member for Queens will excuse himself. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you. It gives me an opportunity to answer the question that was asked of me. Again, I want to thank the honourable member from Kings West for the tremendous work he's been doing as Minister of Health, collaborating with our partners across the province, Mr. Speaker. In October 2013, Nova Scotia's made the first step, quite frankly, of getting control of our healthcare system and delivering a unified healthcare system across this province, and that was getting rid of the New Democratic Party, Mr. Speaker. We moved forward to bring together, to tear down the walls in the healthcare system, and we're going to continue to deliver healthcare, Mr. Speaker, to all Nova Scotians on behalf of all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, not a certain few.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Speaker, my question is also for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, I know members are very concerned about this issue. We've seen a couple ejected from the chamber today. It's a serious issue. When people don't have a doctor, it's something that we hear about. And I want to ask the Minister, community health surveys are used to determine how many people are actually without a physician, without a doctor, in local regions. What is the Minister doing to support the community health surveys to determine the numbers behind these concerns?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first I want to compliment the member opposite who went about his inquiry for his community in the right way. He came in and sat down with Dr. Harrigan and officials in our department to take a look at what are the long-range requirements for his area, and that really is what we need to be taking a look at. Just in the last 6 months, we've had 2 or 3 doctors who were practicing full out on one day, and they were in a hospital bed the next day. We have those situations that do come along. But what we know is developing a plan for the province. The best information that we have at the moment is that 90.3% do have a family doctor. We are working hard to get that so that every Nova Scotian who wishes to have a family practitioner, a primary care provider, that they will have that available to them.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I can't help but think one of the sources for supply of these doctors that we need in our local communities is right inside those communities. There are many young Nova Scotians who have the marks to get into medical school, but sometimes they don't manage to make it in because of the competition. And I know the province does subsidize these seats in medical school. So my question, given that we have this resource in front of us, what is the province doing to actually support Nova Scotians coming from these communities to be able to get their education, to become general practitioners so they can practice in their communities versus, say, subsidies that might be going to physicians whose goal may be more so to do research?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. One of the areas that we know that is able to provide doctors for communities is to actually have doctors who grow up in a community, and Clare is the Clare Clinic is probably one of the greatest examples we have in the province, where the majority of doctors recruited to that clinic actually grew up in the area, and in fact are Acadian in descent. They're able to handle the language and culture of the patients they have to look at. However, it's very hard to pin that down for every community across the province. What I can say to the member opposite is that we have the most Nova Scotians at the Dal Med School currently than what we've had in a couple of decades. And furthermore, we need to keep in mind that the practice of doctors is dramatically changing. They're no longer working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. They're much more in line with about 50 hours a week. So that model that is changing is also providing us with many, many challenges.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, there's a serious doctor shortage across the province, and we can clap in here today and thank people, but it's not going to go away just on that. We actually need real solutions. There's thousands of people just in Pictou County, thousands looking for a doctor just in Pictou County. And today I heard the minister mention nurse practitioners a couple times in question period. First time I've really heard him mention nurse practitioners, and I actually think they can be a big part of the solution. They do a lot in the Alberta healthcare system and a lot in the Ontario healthcare system. We have a few here in acute care. We have very, very, very few in primary care. We should have more. What is the minister's plan to engage more nurse practitioners and empower more nurse practitioners to be part of the system, because doctors are working their guts out trying to get through patients, and it's not working.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And really, what the member is speaking to is that changing model of care, where yes, doctors are working long hours, in fact, going the extra mile day after day, and that's why many of them do want to move to the comprehensive team approach to delivering primary care in their community. And in fact, it is the model that we know we can make great gains with across Nova Scotia. And I think one of the most pivotal personnel for that kind of model is actually a nurse practitioner. And we have committed to getting more nurse practitioners on the ground in the province. We know that in fact the deputy and I and the nurses union have started to talk about an NP locum that could be available for situations like the one that the member opposite.
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Pictou East. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to opposition business. The Leader of the Official Opposition. House Leader, pardon me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can you call Bill number 155?
We'll now call Bill number 155. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to get up and talk about something as important as jobs, Mr. Speaker, as important as using the resources that we have around us to give people meaningful employment here at home. Mr. Speaker, I say that because this bill could easily be called a bill to require the government to do its job, Mr. Speaker, because it is very telling that we have to bring in a bill to compel the government to bring in regulations for an act that it passed on its own almost 2 years ago.